I need you to understand what it feels like to be completely alone in the sky before I tell you what was waiting for me when I came down from it. Because the contrast matters, because the difference between where I was and where I landed is the thing that makes this so deeply, permanently wrong. When you are paragliding at 500 feet in the last light of a September evening, when the thermal beneath you is wide and warm and the harness has settled into the specific cradle of a long glide, when the world below is rendered small and golden and abstracted by distance, you feel something that I can only describe as the particular safety of altitude, the sense that the world and everything in it cannot reach you up here, that you exist in a temporary removal from all of it, in a pocket of sky that belongs only to you and the thermal and the wing above you. I have been paragliding for 9 years. I have logged over 400 hours of flight time. I know that feeling very well. I know it the way you know something that has become part of the structure of your life, reliable and predictable and exactly what it has always been. I came down from that sky on the evening of September 14th, and I landed in a field, and the field was full of scarecrows, and every single scarecrow in that field was facing me. And I want you to understand that the journey from that sky to that field, from that feeling of untouchable altitude to what I found when I touched the ground, is a journey I have never fully recovered from making. Let me take you to the beginning. Let me give you the whole evening so that when we land in that field together, you feel the full weight of arriving there. I am 32 years old. I took up paragliding at 23 after a period of my life that I can only describe as the period when I needed to find something that required all of me, that demanded total presence, that left no bandwidth for the parts of my mind that were not being useful at the time. Paragliding did that. Paragliding requires your complete attention in a way that is simultaneously technical and physical and almost meditative. And over 9 years, it has become the most central practice in my life, the thing around which the other things organize themselves. I know my equipment with the depth of someone who has packed and unpacked it 400 times, who has stood in landing fields and on launch ramps and on ridge tops, holding the lines up to the light, checking for damage with the specific careful attention of someone who understands that the difference between a line that is compromised and a line that is not is the difference between flying and falling. I'm not reckless. I do not take unnecessary risks. I fly in conditions I understand, and I turn around when conditions change. I tell you this because what happened that evening happened to someone who was making conservative decisions, someone who chose the field because the field was the safe option, and I want the full weight of that irony to be present as we go forward. The evening begins at a launch site I have used many times, a grass ridge on the eastern side of a farming valley that provides reliable lift in the late afternoon when the fields below have been heating all day and the thermals are stable and well-defined. I arrive at 3:30, lay out my wing, check my lines, check my harness, check the wind with my ribbon and my feel for the air. Conditions are excellent. The wind is 8 to 10 kilometers from the south-southwest, consistent, no gusting, the kind of conditions that experienced pilots describe as textbook. The sky is that particular late September blue that deepens as you climb into it, and the light on the valley below is already beginning its shift toward gold, toward the specific warm amber of late afternoon that I love flying in, because the shadows it produces turn the landscape below into something that looks painted, that looks like the world as it might exist in a dream of itself. I launch at 4:15. The wing rises cleanly. I run 3 steps forward into the slight gradient at the ridge edge, and then I am up. For the next 2 hours, I work the valley. This is a valley I know intimately. I know where the thermals develop over the darker colored fields, where the ridge lift stays consistent along the eastern face, with a sink tends to develop in the late afternoon when the heating cycle begins to reverse. I work it the way a musician works a familiar piece, with the automatic competence of deep familiarity and the sustained pleasure of something done well. The flight is excellent. I reached 600 feet above launch height twice, the second time staying in the thermal long enough to drift north along the ridge and gain a view of the valley from an angle I have not had before. And from that height in that light, the valley is extraordinary. The fields in their September state, some harvested and brown, some still carrying the last of whatever crop, the farms and their outbuildings geometric and small, the roads threading between them. I have my variometer and my radio and my GPS all functioning normally, and I have my reserve parachute in its container at my chest, and I have 9 years and 400 hours, and I have the thermal, and I have the wing, and the evening is exactly what evenings like this are supposed to be. At 6:15, the thermal I have been using begins to cycle down, which is normal for this time in the evening, and I begin assessing my landing options. This is the part of every flight where the pilot transitions from the pleasure of flying to the practical geometry of coming down safely, and it requires a clear field of appropriate size with an accessible approach and acceptable wind conditions. I have two primary options I have used before on this ridge. A large flat field directly below the launch site, which is my usual landing zone, and a secondary field about half a kilometer north that I have landed in once before in a situation where the wind shifted during my final approach and I needed to redirect. Both are familiar. Both are appropriate. I set up a northward glide toward my primary landing zone, and I am at 300 feet and setting up my approach when the wind shifts. It is not a dramatic shift. It is not a gust or a sudden reversal. It is a rotation, the wind moving from south-southwest to east-southeast over about 40 seconds, consistent and gradual, the kind of shift that a weather front moving through would produce, and which in practical terms means that my planned approach into the primary landing zone is now a crosswind approach, which in the fading light with a tired body and 600 feet of altitude to manage is not impossible, but is not what I want. I check my GPS. I assess my height and my glide angle and my distance options. The secondary field is behind me. I have drifted north of it. There's a third field, one I have not landed in, approximately 2/3 of a kilometer to the northwest, that the GPS shows as open and of sufficient size that I can reach on current altitude with margin to spare. The wind in the new direction is actually favorable for an approach to this field. I make the call. I turn northwest. I descend toward the field I have not landed in before. At 150 feet, I can see the field clearly. It is a large agricultural field, roughly rectangular, harvested, the crop residue brown and low in the golden evening light. At the edges of the field, in the specific placement that farmers use to protect crops from birds, there are scarecrows. I register them from altitude as part of the visual inventory of the landing zone. Obstructions, features, things to be aware of. There are perhaps 8 or 10 of them visible from 150, positioned at intervals around the field's perimeter, which is standard. I assess the surface of the field, firm and level. No visible obstructions in the approach corridor, suitable. I continue my descent. At 70 feet, I am committed to the approach. At this height, in this glide angle, I am past the decision point for redirecting without significant risk, and the field below me is clear and the approach is clean, and I am doing what I do, which is a specific sequence of actions that brings a paraglider safely to the ground. I am watching my height, watching the ground, feeling the brake toggles, managing my speed. And I am also, with the peripheral attention that experienced pilots maintain even during approach, taking in the field below me in more detail than I had from altitude. I become aware of two things simultaneously. The first is that there are more scarecrows than I thought from altitude. Significantly more. Not 8 or 10 at the perimeter. Many more than that, distributed across the interior of the field as well, at irregular intervals. Many of them, 30 perhaps more, standing in the brown crop residue in the fading evening light. The second thing I become aware of is that they're all facing the same direction. In every field where I have ever seen scarecrows, they face outward, away from the field center, oriented toward the birds and animals they are placed to deter. These scarecrows are all facing inward, all facing toward the center of the field, all facing from where I am in my approach corridor toward me. Elon, I cannot do anything else. I am at 40 feet and committed, and the ground comes up and my feet find it, and I run 2 steps and the wing collapses behind me in the way it is supposed to, and I am down, standing in the brown field. And I look up from managing the collapse, and I take in what is around me and the quality of attention I was giving this field from the approach. The peripheral half attention of a pilot managing a landing gives way to the full direct attention of a person standing on the ground. And what that full attention shows me is that I am surrounded. They are everywhere, not concentrated at the perimeter, not organized in neat rows, scattered across the field in a distribution that is not random, but is not any pattern I can name. Too many of them, too close, the nearest one perhaps 15 feet from where I landed, the farthest at the field's edge. They are made in the way that scarecrows are made, crosshatched frames, straw-stuffed bodies, clothing draped over the form, heads fashioned from sacks or bags or whatever material was available. They're made differently from each other, which means they were made separately over time by different hands or the same hands in different moods, some crude and some elaborately detailed, some with painted faces and some with no faces at all, just the smooth, blank surface of the sack material. And every single one of them is oriented toward the same point, the point where I landed, the point where I'm standing right now. I stand in the collapsed wing material, and I do a slow full turn, and I count what I can see, and I count 31. 31 scarecrows in a harvested agricultural field, and all 31 of them are facing me. I look at the nearest one, the one at 15 feet, and its painted face, if I can call 2 dark marks for eyes and a horizontal mark for a mouth, a face, is directed at me with the flat attention of a thing that has no eyes and therefore cannot look at you, and somehow is. I look at the clothing on it. Old work clothes, a flannel shirt, and canvas trousers, both weathered to the color of the field, both faded and frayed. I look at its hands, which are stuffed gloves, and the stuffed gloves are oriented forward, palms out, facing me, the fingers slightly spread, as if gesturing towards something, or at something, or asking something I am not prepared to answer. I begin packing my wing. I do this with the specific focused efficiency of someone who needs their hands to be doing something purposeful, who needs the task of packing to be the full content of the moment. Because if the full content of the moment is the field and the scarecrows and the light going and the silence, then the moment is something I cannot stay inside. I pack my wing and I manage my lines and I stuff the canopy into its bag and I work. I do not look up. I tell myself I am not looking up because I'm focused on the packing and the packing requires attention. I am not looking up because every time I do the nearest scarecrow is there in my peripheral vision, and my peripheral vision insists on providing me with more information about it than I want. I finish packing. I put my pack on my back. I look up. I do a slow, deliberate scan of the field because I am 32 years old and not a child and not someone who runs from a field of scarecrows in the dark. And the scan shows me what the scan has to show me, which is 31 scarecrows in the failing evening light. All of them where they were, all of them as they were, all of them facing the same point, which is the point where I am standing. The light is going fast now, the gold tipping toward the blue-gray of dusk. And in this light, the scarecrows have taken on a quality that the direct light of late afternoon held at bay. In this light, they are less clearly constructed, less obviously fabric and straw on wooden crosses, more like the shape of a standing person than the representation of one, more inhabited. I walk toward the field's southern edge, which is the shortest route to the road. I walk a direct line, and I do not look at them as I pass them, and I pass them closely because they are distributed across the field, and there's no route to the edge that does not pass closely by several of them. I pass the first one at 4 feet. 4 feet away, passing it, not looking at it, looking at the field edge ahead of me. And in my peripheral vision, it is there, the painted face, the stuffed gloves, the flapping hem of the canvas trousers in the evening wind, and every instinct in my peripheral vision is reporting to me that it is looking at me as I pass, that the flat painted face is tracking me the way a face tracks something moving. And I tell my peripheral vision that it is wrong, and I keep walking. I reach the field edge. There is a wooden stile over the fence, and I climb it, and I drop to the road on the other side, and I turn back and I look at the field from the road. The field is dark now, the dusk advanced, and the scarecrows are shapes in the dark, shapes on their crosses, distributed across the field. And from the road I can see that they are all still facing the same direction, all facing the point in the interior of the field where I landed, all facing the compressed grass of my landing and the footprints I left in the crop residue, all facing the place where I was standing. All of them. Every one. I walk the 2 kilometers back to the launch site, and my car in the complete dark, and I do not look back. I drive home. I pack my gear in my garage, and I shower, and I eat something I don't taste, and I sit in my kitchen, and I think. I think about who owns that field and what the scarecrows are for, and why they are positioned the way they are positioned, and I build every version of this that resolves into ordinary, and I hold each version up and I look at it, and I put it down. Because here's the thing I haven't told you yet. Here is the thing I didn't tell you because I needed you to be in the field with me first, needed you to have the weight of the field and the failing light and the 31 faces before I gave you this. When I reached the stile and climbed it and dropped to the road, I turned back. I looked at the field, and I counted. I counted the shapes in the dusk, and I counted them carefully, and the count was 32. 32, not 31. I counted 31 in the field when I landed. I counted the same 31 as I packed. I walked a direct line to the stile, and I did not count as I walked because I was not looking. And from the road, from outside the field, from the safety of the other side of the fence, there are 32. I have not gone back to that field. I have looked for it on maps, and I can identify the approximate location, but I have not driven out to it, and I will not drive out to it. I fly other valleys now, different approaches, different landing fields. I still paraglide. I still love the sky in the way that 9 years of loving something in that depth produces love. But every landing now, every final approach at every field, I look at the field below me, and I look at what is in it, and I look at what is facing what, and sometimes from altitude, in the specific evening light when the shadows are long and the shapes below are not yet fully resolved, I think I see something in a field below me, and my brake toggle hand goes tight, and my heart rate does something that the variometer doesn't measure, and I look harder, and it is nothing. It is always nothing, just the shapes that evening light makes in fields when you are frightened and high above the ground. It is always nothing. Except for the night, I counted 32 when I counted 31, and there was one more than there should have been, and it was standing by the stile, by the place I crossed, by the place I left the field, standing there in the dusk, facing the road, facing the direction I was walking, facing wherever I was going, and I do not know when it moved, and I do not know what it was, and I do not know if it is still standing there in that field in the dark, waiting patient turning as something turns to face the thing it is waiting for. Story number 2. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that my mother's maiden name is not something that I have ever published, not something that appears in any record online that I know of, not something I discussed on that investigation, not something that any member of the team I was with that night knew. And what matters is that when I played back the recording I made in that basement corridor, in the 47 minutes of audio I captured in that building between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., there's a voice on the recording that is not my voice, not the voice of anyone in our team, not a sound that any piece of equipment we had with us produces, and it says my mother's maiden name. It says it clearly. It says it the way you say something you know. It says it the way you say a word that is familiar to you, that has weight and history and meaning in your mouth. It says it, and the rest of the recording is silence. 47 minutes of the specific ambient silence of an abandoned building at night. And then in the last 4 minutes of the recording, just once in a voice that I'm going to have to describe as a whisper, because whisper is the closest human language category to what it is, my mother's maiden name. In a building that has been abandoned for 30 years. In a basement corridor that no living person was occupying except me. And I need you to understand what that means. I need you to feel the full weight of what that means before I take you inside that building and walk you down that corridor and show you where I was standing when something said what it said. I have been doing paranormal investigation for 6 years. I want to be careful how I describe this because paranormal investigation exists on a spectrum of seriousness and methodology that ranges from the rigorously evidence-based to the profoundly theatrical. And I want you to know where on that spectrum I sit before you calibrate how much weight to give what I'm telling you. I am on the methodological end. I am interested in evidence and documentation in a specific standard of capturing something anomalous in a way that eliminates every mundane explanation before acknowledging that it is anomalous. I do not go to investigations hoping to be frightened. I go to investigations hoping to record data. And if that data turns out to be entirely explicable by natural causes, buildings settling, infrasound from nearby HVAC systems, the specific acoustic properties of old structures producing auditory artifacts, then I go home with a cleaner understanding of what the building is doing and nothing in my evidence that qualifies as genuinely anomalous. In 6 years, I have been in 43 different locations. In 43 locations, I have encountered things that I cannot explain on 31 occasions. Things that fall into specific categories that my training has not been able to resolve. I tell you 31 because I want you to know that I am not a person for whom every creek is a ghost and every cold spot is a presence. I am a person with a high bar for anomalous and a track record of discarding 90% of what I capture because 90% of it has an explanation. What I captured in that basement does not have an explanation. What I captured in that basement says my mother's maiden name. I have no framework in which that has a natural explanation. The building is an asylum. Abandoned, as most of the locations I investigate are abandoned, but abandoned with a specific history. It was a state psychiatric institution that operated from 1912 until 1989 that at its peak housed over 800 patients in a facility built for 300, that closed under a combination of deinstitutionalization policy and a series of investigations into patient treatment that I have read about and will not detail here beyond saying that what was done. In that building to the people inside it, over 77 years of operation was not always, or perhaps not frequently, what should have been done. The building has been standing empty since 1989. That is 30 years of vacancy, 30 years of the specific slow deterioration that abandonment produces in a large institutional structure. The water intrusion, the plaster failure, the wood rot, the collapse of the lower priority structural elements while the main bones of the building hold. It is a 4-story brick institutional building of the late Victorian style, large and symmetrical from the exterior, internally divided into the specific organization of its original function: wards, a central administrative core, treatment rooms, a basement level that housed the medical infrastructure, and, according to the historical records I researched before visiting, a hydrotherapy suite and rooms that the records describe in terms I am going to leave vague here, except to say that they are rooms in which things were done to people that we no longer do. I entered the building with a team of 3 other investigators on a Friday night in November, which means we enter in the dark, which we prefer because the dark produces lower ambient noise and cleaner audio conditions. We have permissions. I do not enter structures without permissions. And the owner of this property, a preservation organization that has been attempting to raise funds for structural stabilization, gave us written access for a 6-hour investigation window. We enter at 9 p.m. We split into teams of 2 for the first 2 hours, covering the upper floors where the patient wards were located, and then come together for the basement level, which all 4 of us agreed in our pre-investigation briefing would be better covered as a full team. I will not take you through all of the upper floors. I will tell you that the upper floors produced 3 events that I logged as potentially anomalous and that I later resolved to probable natural causes. A cold spot in the 3rd floor corridor that I traced to a broken window with a specific draft pattern, a sound on the 2nd floor that my partner and I both heard that I determined was almost certainly a bird in the roof space, and a brief electromagnetic field spike that my meter caught in one of the small rooms off the main ward corridor that I logged but was not able to determine the source of, which I categorize as unexplained but not anomalous in the sense of being threatening or intelligent. These are the typical contents of a serious investigation. These are the things you find in old buildings at night that make the investigation interesting without crossing the threshold of something that requires you to sit in your car afterward for an hour before you feel like you could drive. We go to the basement at 11 p.m. as a full team. The stairwell is at the center of the building's main corridor, and it descends 1 full level below the ground floor into what the historical records call the service level, which in practical terms means a series of corridors connecting the mechanical infrastructure, boiler room, electrical subpanels, water systems, with the medical and treatment functions that operated below grade. The corridor lighting has been dead for 30 years, and we operate entirely on our own light, flashlights and headlamps, and my infrared camera, which provides its own illumination and records in the near-infrared spectrum that can sometimes capture things the visible spectrum misses. The corridor is narrow, about 5 feet wide, with the brick walls of the basement that was built for function rather than the comfort of anyone walking through it, and the ceiling is low, and the doors along it are heavy institutional doors, many of them open on their corroded hinges, some of them closed and immovable, some of them removed entirely to show the rooms beyond. We split the basement differently. My partner Mark takes the north wing with one of the other investigators, and I take the south corridor with the 4th member of our team, a woman named Dana who has been investigating with me for 3 years and whose methodological standards match mine closely enough that we work well together in high-tension environments. Dana and I take the south corridor because the south corridor leads to the hydrotherapy suite and the rooms beyond it, which are the rooms from the records, and because the historical density of a location often corresponds with the density of anomalous activity, and the south corridor has the highest historical density in the building by any measure I applied in my research. I set up my audio recorder at the entrance to the south corridor at 11 p.m. exactly. I note the time in my log. I note the ambient temperature. I note that the recorder is positioned on a small tripod stand at approximately 3 feet height, and that the gain is set to the level I use for baseline ambient capture. which is sensitive enough to detect a whisper at 30 feet. I start the recorder and I leave it running. Dana, and I move down the corridor. We are in the corridor for 47 minutes. We cover the hydrotherapy suite, which is a large room at the end of the corridor with the specific institutional ceramic of its era still intact on the floor and the lower walls, and we cover 3 of the rooms off the main corridor, 2 of which are empty and 1 of which still contains equipment I am not going to describe beyond saying that it is medical equipment and that it is from the kind of practice of medicine that we do not practice anymore, and the presence of in the room after. 30 years of abandonment means something that I did not want to sit with for long. We capture 1 thermal anomaly in the hydrotherapy suite, a brief drop in surface temperature on the floor in the center of the room that lasted approximately 20 seconds and then normalized, and nothing else. Nothing audible that we note at the time. Nothing on my camera that I flagged during the investigation. We return to the corridor entrance at 11:47 p.m. I collect the recorder. I review the recording the following day at home, which is my standard practice. I listen at normal gain first, then at amplified gain through headphones, making notes at timestamps where I hear anything that requires further review. For the first 42 minutes of the recording, the audio is the baseline ambient of an old basement corridor at night. The very low-frequency rumble that old structures produce, a periodic drip somewhere at the limit of audible range, the distant footsteps of Mark and his partner in the north wing, the occasional word or half-sentence of Dana's, and my own communication as we move through the rooms off the corridor. Nothing that requires flagging. I am at 43 minutes on the recording, listening at amplified gain with my headphones, and I am beginning to believe this is going to be a clean recording, which is normal when I hear it. It is at 43 minutes and 18 seconds. I have checked this timestamp more times than I have slept since, which is not much. At 43 minutes and 18 seconds, in the south corridor of the basement of an abandoned psychiatric institution that has been empty for 30 years, on a recording being made by a piece of equipment sitting unattended on a tripod, while the 2 people who know about the recording are in the hydrotherapy suite 30 feet away, a voice says my mother's maiden name. I will not tell you the name here. I have decided not to tell you the name partly out of the specific impulse to protect it, and partly because the name itself is not the point. Any name would be as disturbing in that corridor as this one, and the name matters only insofar as it is something that cannot be explained by reference to any natural process in that building. The voice says it once. It says it clearly, not loudly. It is within the whisper category in terms of volume, but it has a quality that a whisper doesn't always have, which is intent. It sounds intentional. It sounds like a word chosen deliberately from a vocabulary rather than an accidental sound that the ear organizes into language. It says the name, and then it does not say anything else. The remaining 4 minutes of the recording are clean ambient again. And then at 47 minutes, the recording catches the sound of Dana and me returning down the corridor from the hydrotherapy suite, our footsteps and the sounds of our gear. And that is the recording. I listen to it 11 times before I stop. I listen to it at standard gain and at amplified gain and at multiple equalization settings, and I listen for the artifact that would tell me it is a natural sound assembled into language by pattern-seeking ears. I know what those artifacts sound like. I have been listening to field recordings for 6 years, and I know the difference between an ambient sound that resembles a word and a word. This is a word. This is a specific word, a specific name, said in a voice that has the character of a human voice, that has its own timbre and its own breath quality, thin breath, careful breath, the breath of something that is being very deliberate about being quiet. And I cannot explain it. And I have not found anyone who can explain it. And I have played it for 2 colleagues who also investigate and whose standards I respect, and both of them listen to it with the specific stillness of someone hearing, something they cannot account for. And one of them asked me how the building could know that name. And I cannot answer him because I do not know how a building that has been empty for 30 years could know the maiden name of my mother, could know the name she carried before she was married, the name that was hers in the years before she had me, the name that no one at that investigation knew and no one at that investigation said, and that exists in no record that I could find that would be accessible to anyone or anything that was in that basement on that Friday night, except for whatever it was that was in that corridor while my recorder was running and I was 30 feet away in hydrotherapy suite, except for whatever found my recorder and leaned down to it in the dark and said in a careful, deliberate whisper the one thing in the world it could have said to me that would be the most personal, the most precise, the most impossible to explain away, the name my mother had before she was my mother, the name that belongs to a part of her life I had no hand in and cannot account for, the name that says, with a clarity that haunts me every day since, that whatever said it knows me in a way that goes further back than I do. I have not returned to that building. I have the recordings saved in 4 locations, 2 cloud backups, 1 external hard drive, 1 audio file emailed to myself that sits in my inbox and that I do not delete. I have the recording, and I have the timestamp, and I have the 47 minutes of clean ambient that brackets the 4 seconds of voice, and I have 6 years of methodology that tells me what this is and is not, and what it is not is explicable, and what it is I will leave you to decide for yourself, because I have made my decision, and my decision is that I am done with that building, done with that basement, done with the specific quality of darkness that gathers in the corridors of places, where things happen to people, done with taking my recorder into that darkness and leaving it running and going away and coming back to hear what it caught while I was gone. Done. Except that I listen to the recording sometimes. I listen to it at 1 in the morning with my headphones on and the lights off, and I hear it say the name, and I think about what is still in that basement, in that south corridor, crouched near the floor in the dark near where my tripod stood, knowing things it should not know, saying things it had no right to say, waiting for the next person to walk down that corridor and leave something running and go away, because it is patient, because it has been there for 30 years already, and patience is the one thing it has in abundance. I still investigate different buildings. I go with more people now, and I do not split teams, and I do not leave equipment unattended, and I review my recordings with the specific bracing of someone who is always prepared to hear something he did not see, something that was there while he was elsewhere, something that knows more than it should. I have not heard anything like it since, but I have also not returned to that basement, and I think about that sometimes. I think about the south corridor and the hydrotherapy suite and the room with the equipment and the 43 minutes of clean ambient before the 4 seconds of whisper. And I think about the fact that whatever said, it said it once. Not twice. Not repeatedly. Once. With the specific economy of something that needed to say only one thing to be sure I understood it. One name. One name to tell me that it knows me. One name to tell me that whatever distance I travel from that basement, whatever other buildings I walk into and out of and document and analyze, I am already known. I was already known before I walked through that door, and it wanted me to know that it knows. Story number 3. I want you to think about what it would take to convince you that you are not alone in your own house. Not the ambient anxiety of being alone at night that most people carry at some level. Not the ordinary creak of settling would that the rational mind explains and the irrational mind holds on to for a few seconds before letting go. I want you to think about what actual, concrete, undeniable evidence would have to be placed in front of you in your own home in the middle of the night to make you understand with certainty that something else has been there. because I woke up at 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday in February, and I walked out of my bedroom and I found that evidence, and it was not ambiguous, and it was not something I could explain away, and it was the most specific and deliberate message that could possibly have been left for me to find, because whoever or whatever left it knew exactly what it would mean to me, knew exactly what I cannot handle about mirrors, knew the one thing in my house that would communicate most clearly that I am not alone in it, because mirrors were turned to face the wall in every room of my house. Every single one of them turned so that the reflective surface faces the plaster, so that looking at them from the room, you see only the back of the frame, only the opaque reverse. Every mirror in my house turned to face the wall in the middle of the night while I was asleep. I live alone. I have lived alone for 3 years. There is no one here. I know what you're thinking. I know the first thing you reach for, because it is the first thing I reached for, sleepwalking. I did this in my sleep. I turned the mirrors myself, in some state between sleeping and waking, and I have no memory of it, because that is what sleepwalking is, that is what it produces, and I simply need to look into sleep disorders and speak to a doctor, and this is manageable, and this is not what I think it is. I want you to hold that explanation because I held it too, and I want you to know exactly where it fails. I want you to feel the specific place where that explanation stops working and something else has to begin before I take you through the night of the mirrors and show you everything. I am 28 years old. I live in a ground floor apartment in a 3-story building, a 2-bedroom apartment that I occupy alone, the second bedroom serving as a home office. I have been in this apartment for 3 years, and in that time, I have lived alone the whole time, which I know because I'm careful about it, which I know because living alone after the 4 years before it, after the relationship that preceded this apartment and this city and this version of my life, was a specific and deliberate choice, and I have been deliberate about maintaining it. I have 2 close friends in this city, both of whom I see regularly, neither of whom has a key to my apartment. My landlord has a key. I have a deadbolt and a chain, both of which I engage every night before sleep. I'm not careless about security. I tell you this because the question of how something gets into a ground floor apartment when the deadbolt and chain are both engaged from the inside is a question I have been asking for every day since February, and I have not found an answer. The mirrors. There are 7 of them in the apartment. The bathroom mirror, which is a wall-mounted frameless rectangle above the sink. The full-length mirror in my bedroom, which stands on its own frame leaning against the wall beside the wardrobe. The small circular mirror in the hallway that was in the apartment when I moved in and that I kept because I liked it. The mirror on the back of the bedroom door, also there when I moved in. The decorative mirror in the living room, oval in a wooden frame that I bought at a market 2 years ago. The mirror in the second bedroom that I use as a home office, a plain rectangular piece I hung when I set up the room. And the mirror in the kitchen, small and square, hung near the window that I bought because the kitchen faces north and gets little light, and I thought the mirror would help with that. 7 mirrors, all in different rooms, all of different types, all hung or positioned differently, some fixed to walls, some freestanding, some on doors. On the night of February 11th, I go to bed at 11:15 p.m. I check the deadbolt and the chain as I always do. I turn off the lights and I go to sleep. I wake up at 2:37 a.m. I know the time because my phone is on my nightstand and the screen wakes when I move and I see the time. I wake because of the sound, or I think I wake because of the sound, but by the time I'm awake enough to catalog the experience of waking, the sound, if there was a sound, is gone, and there's only the apartment at night and the specific quality of 2:30 a.m., which is quiet in a way that 2 a.m. in cities is not always quiet, a deep residential stillness with the occasional distant car and nothing else. I lie in bed for about 30 seconds, the standard assessment period of a person who has woken in the night, and is deciding whether the waking was significant. I feel alert in a way that is slightly beyond the normal alertness of being disturbed from sleep, a heightened quality, the specific animal alertness of someone whose unconscious mind has already decided that something is different before the conscious mind has caught up. I sit up, I turn on my bedside lamp, and I look at the full-length mirror leaning against the wall beside my wardrobe, and I see that it is turned around. Facing the wall, the back of the frame visible, the dark would reverse, no reflection. I sit very still for a long moment. I look at the mirror with the specific attention of someone trying to locate the mistake in what they're seeing. The mirror is turned around. The mirror was facing outward when I went to bed. I know this because I looked at my reflection in it as I got undressed 11 hours ago, which I do every night, which is habit, and the mirror was facing outward and now is facing the wall, and I am sitting in my bed at 2:30 in the morning looking at the back of a mirror that was not that way when I went to sleep. I get out of bed. I go to the bathroom. The bathroom mirror is turned. The reflective surface is against the wall tile, the screws through the back of the frame visible, the whole piece rotated on its wall mount to face backward. I go to the hallway. The circular mirror in the hallway is facing the wall. I go to the living room. The oval mirror is facing the wall. I check the back of the bedroom door. The door is standing open and the mirror on it is facing away from the room, facing the hinge side. I go to the home office. The rectangular mirror is facing the wall. I go to the kitchen. The small square mirror is turned. It's back to the room, the wall behind it visible where the reflective surface used to show it. 7 mirrors. All of them turned to face the wall. All of them in different rooms. All of them of different types. All of them requiring a different physical approach to turn. The bathroom mirror rotated on its wall mount. The full-length mirror physically lifted and reversed and replaced. The door mirror facing away on a door that was open when I went to sleep. The oval mirror in the living room lifted from its hook, reversed, and replaced. These are not identical actions. Turning 7 mirrors of different types in different configurations in different rooms requires 7 separate considered actions, each specific to the mirror in question, each requiring a person to physically engage with the mirror, assess its mounting and its orientation, and reverse it. This is not a sleepwalking behavior. Sleepwalking is low-level motor function. I know this. I have researched this since February with the specific focus of someone looking for the explanation that lets them sleep again, and sleepwalking does not produce complex sequential purposeful behavior across multiple rooms involving varied physical tasks. Sleepwalking produces simple repetitive motor actions, turning 7 uniquely mounted mirrors to face the wall in 7 different rooms in a way that is identical in outcome, if not in method, is not simple repetitive motor action. It is a project. It is something done with intention by something that knew what it was doing and why. I stand in my kitchen at 2:38 a.m. and I look at the back of the small square mirror above the window, and I listen to my apartment. And my apartment is silent, and the deadbolt and chain are engaged as I check them from the kitchen doorway, and all 7 mirrors are facing the wall, and I am alone in this apartment. I am alone in this apartment in the way that alone means there is no other person here. I check the rooms. I check every room the way I check them, thoroughly, with the closets and the spaces under the beds and behind the furniture. I am alone. I am alone, and every mirror in my apartment has been turned to face the wall, and I do not know how, and I do not know why, and I am standing in my kitchen in the 2:30 a.m. silence, and I understand, with the complete and unreservable certainty of someone who has eliminated every alternative, that something was here. I want to tell you about mirrors. I want to tell you why mirrors, specifically why this particular thing, why of all the things in this apartment that could have been moved or changed or arranged differently. This is the thing that communicates most precisely that something knows me. I have a specific thing with mirrors that is not quite a phobia, but is close enough to phobia that it functions the same way in practice. I do not like reflections that I do not anticipate. I do not like mirrors in dark rooms. I do not like looking into a mirror and being startled by my own reflection, which sounds like something everyone experiences, but for me, this has a specific quality that goes beyond the ordinary startle, a moment of non-recognition, of seeing the reflection before I have connected it to myself. And in that moment, in that fraction of a second before I recognize myself, experiencing something that I can only describe as wrongness. The reflection is wrong in that instant. Not my face, not my body, nothing externally wrong. Wrong in the way that something you know is looking at you from the wrong side. Wrong in the way that a copy is wrong even when it's perfect. I have never told anyone this. I do not have a name for it. It is mine and private and not something that comes up in normal conversation. It is something I live with quietly, something I manage by being careful about mirrors and low-light conditions, by being deliberate about how I approach them, by never letting myself be surprised by one. Something turned those mirrors so that when I walked through my apartment in the night and reached each mirror, I would not see my reflection. 7 mirrors, all turned. Every reflective surface in this apartment eliminated. Someone or something went through every room of this apartment and turned every mirror to face away from the room. And the effect of this, the thing this achieves beyond any other possible interpretation, is that I walk through my own home and I see no reflection of myself anywhere. I walk through my apartment and there is no image of me in it. Every surface that would show me to myself has been turned away. And I do not know if this was done as a gift to protect me from the thing that frightens me about my own reflection, or if it was done as something else entirely, something that is not a gift, something that means something darker about why it would want my reflection eliminated, what it knows about what lives in the space between me and my reflection in those moments of non-recognition, what it has seen there that I have only felt. I sleep with the lights on now. I have since February. I have replaced 2 of the mirrors with the kind that have no frame, that are directly adhered to the wall and cannot be turned without tools. The full-length mirror I moved to a storage unit. The hallway mirror I took down. I have reduced the number of mirrors in this apartment from 7 to 3, and 3 feels like a number I can account for. A number I can check at 2:30 in the morning if I wake up with that particular heightened alertness. A number that can be verified quickly and completely. I check them every morning. Every morning when I wake up, I check that the 3 remaining mirrors are facing the room, are showing me myself, are doing the thing that mirrors do. They always are. Every morning they are as they should be. But I think about February. I think about waking up and finding the apartment reconfigured, finding every reflective surface turned away, finding the evidence of a presence so specific and so intimate that it stops feeling like a violation and starts feeling like something more complicated, more personal, more like a communication from something that knows me in a way that should not be possible. I think about what it was doing in here in the dark while I was asleep, moving through room after room, turning each mirror carefully, deliberately, without waking me. I think about the care of it, the patience of it, the way it went from room to room in my sleeping apartment and touched each mirror in turn, 7 mirrors, every one of them, and left no other trace, no other disturbance, nothing moved or changed or disturbed except this one specific thing, this one precise and personal thing. And I think about whether it is still here. I think about whether it was ever not here. I think about the 3 years I have lived in this apartment believing I was alone, believing that alone means what alone has always meant, And I think about what it would mean if alone has never meant what I thought it meant, if something has been here since before I arrived, if the apartment was never mine to be alone in, if there is something that lives in the space between me and my reflection, in that fraction of a second of wrongness, something that turns the mirrors away, not to spare me, but to keep what it knows hidden, to keep me from seeing what looks back at me in the dark when I do not recognize myself. Something that is here, something that has always been here, something that wanted me to know on one specific February night that it knows me. All of me. The parts one show and the parts one don't. The parts one have never told anyone. The parts one thought were mine alone and private. Mine in the way that only the self is private, that no one can access except through me. Something knows those parts. Something was here. Something turned the mirrors. And I do not know, on any given night when I wake at 2:30 and the apartment is quiet, and I lie in the dark and listen, whether it is here now, in the room with me, in the particular darkness that the bedside lamp doesn't quite reach, whether it is looking at the back of its own hand, whether it is patient, whether it is waiting for me to do the one thing I have been careful not to do since February. The one thing that would show it that I know it is here and that I'm not afraid, the one thing I will not do, the thing it wants, which is to turn the mirrors back around.